Number 10, overshadowed and the beard. Hatshepsut for a long while was content to play the supporting role among Egypt's royals, but when she decided she wasn't anymore, things took a turn. She was the daughter of Thutmose I and wife/sister to her half-brother Thutmose II. I know, don't worry, I'll address it later in the video, stay tuned. When he died in 1479 BC and left their son as heir, she took on the role as regent to Thutmose III, but she basically just acted as the rightful ruler. As the young king came of age finally, she declared herself Pharaoh. The strangest part was that she chose to portray herself in pictures as a man with a male body and a false beard. She said that the god Amun was her father and insisted that he commanded her to take charge of Egypt. Who's gonna argue with a god, right? But no one could quite explain the issue with the beard. Nevertheless, during her reign, it was a time of peace and prosperity for Egypt. Number 9, Sesostris. Sesostris was one of the greatest military commanders in Egyptian history, who was celebrated for the extent of his conquests. He stretched the kingdom further than anyone before him, but he was not without his quirks. According to accounts by Herodotus, Sesostris left pillars on every battlefield. Along with the usual bragging and boasting of how he won, he would carve into them images of genitalia, like people do on the bathroom stalls, you know? If he thought that his enemy fought valiantly, he carved a If he thought they didn't put much of a fight, he would carve a Great. Yeah, that just goes to show what he thought about things. The latter was a sign of disrespect for his subdued enemies, while the other was a sign of honor, like, hey man, you stuck it to me. Apparently, some even stood the test of time, lasting over 1500 years and seen firsthand by Herodotus himself. For those of you who don't know, for reference, Herodotus is considered as the father of historians, one of the very first to take up the task. Number 8, ceremonial seating. The whole idea behind the pharaohs was that they were direct descendants from the gods themselves. Therefore, they too had deific powers and had the capability of restoring life to the land. The Nile River had significant importance to the people of Egypt. It provided fertile soil and water irrigation. It was pretty awesome. In order to ensure its abundance would continue, pharaohs would organize a festival where they would ceremoniously fill it with their seed. Yeah. Some historians believe that this was in honor of the creation story of how life came to be, and therefore it was kind of like a fertility festival. Crowds would gather at the Nile and await the arrival of their pharaoh. They would then disrobe and give their pleasure into the river to ensure its bounty. Some historians say it was just the pharaoh who did this, while others say that the men joined in after. Evidence still remains pretty slim as to whether this really did happen, so take this one with a grain of salt, but that's not to say that there isn't any evidence at all that it did happen. So there. Number 7, deliver me naked. Cleopatra is known as one of the most beautiful women in history, but this could be due to how she used her feminine wiles to get what she wanted. Her beauty and cunning became renowned as a result. While other queens, like the one I mentioned before, concealed their beauty, Cleopatra was all about showing it off, cause girl, if you got it, flaunt it. In order to help secure the political ally and power connected to Caesar, Cleopatra knew how to make an entrance and knew how to win over a guy. It's pretty easy. He was around 52 when they met, and the Egyptian queen was just like 20 and in her prime, so she looked great. She smuggled herself into Alexandria, where Caesar was staying, had her servant tie her up in a bed sack, naked, and carried indoors to Caesar, and she was like, have at her, buddy. In other words, she wrapped her naked body in a carpet, made Caesar's jaw drop to the floor, and secured one of the most beneficial unions on the spot. Honestly, not really messed up. Kind of badass. Honestly, just do your thing. Work it, girl. I dream of having that confidence with my clothes on. You know what I mean? Go girl, you got this. You get that empire. Number 6, Cats and the Battle. Ancient Egypt would have welcomed the film adaptation of Cats, unlike the rest of the world, with open arms, and probably would have built a shrine to it. Giant human cats eating human cockroaches would be revered. Bottom line, cats in ancient Egypt were worshipped and treated like family. It was considered a crime punishable by death to harm one due to the belief in the goddess Bastet. One pharaoh even risked losing a battle because of cats themselves. The Battle of Pelusium of 525 BCE between Pharaoh Psamek III and the Persian king Cambyses II resulted in the first Persian conquest of Egypt, all because of cats. Cambyses took advantage of the cat-loving side of Egypt and used hostages of cats and animals as leverage. So they were just kind of like, well, we can't fight if the cats are let loose. What are we gonna do? We can't kill the cats. And that's how they lost that battle. Number 5, Horus and Set. Speaking of Horus, earlier, remember how I said Horus had to take over defending his father? Well, here is where this story begins. When Horus grew up to be a man, he pulled a Hamlet. He was like, "You killed my father, prepare to die." Thus a series of battles ensued, and one of the gods didn't play fair. Set kept cheating at everything and continued to come out as victor. Not surprising since he didn't earn his way on the throne, he killed for it, kind of like a certain Claudius. Eventually Isis stepped out to help her son/nephew overcome her brother. She set a trap for Set, but after some pitiless begging for his own life, she let him go. Horus was pissed, so angry some of the other gods got upset that he was so angry. They agreed to compete in a final boat race, and Horus was like crushing it. He was doing really well, he was about to win, but then of course Set cheated by turning into a hippopotamus and attacked the boat, therefore claiming victory once again. Osiris finally showed up and declared that no man should take the throne through murder. So Horus took the throne. Why Osiris didn't just settle the whole deal from the beginning is confusing in itself, but hey, kinda reminded me of the eagles that showed at the end of Lord of the Rings that could have saved like 3 movies, you know? Kinda like that. Anyways, let's move on. Number 4, Ra and his boat. Ra is one of the most revered gods in Egyptian mythology, especially since he was the god of the sun. He was depicted as a man with the head of a falcon. That kind of makes sense. He was once the greatest of all gods, but had to take a step back after he got too old and tired, and especially considering his task, I can see why. His job was to drive away darkness and sail across the skies, delivering light wherever he went. But at night, he would dive into the underworld and have to cross 12 gates. 12 hours, an hour per gate. After paying his respect to Osiris every night, a giant snake named Apophis tried to attack and swallow the boat. Every night! Poor guy, no wonder he got worn out. Every day it got harder to defend, and even one night, Apophis succeeded, but could only hold the sunlight for so long. She threw it up, which explained solar eclipses. After Set was cast out after the whole nephew battle, he ended up serving Ra in his boat and kept the snake at bay, but there's something confusing coming later that I think you'll agree is very confusing, so here we go. Coming up, next we have Bast, number 3. Have you ever had a cat look you up and down and kind of like expect something, like worship, you know? Are you a cat person? Dog person? Let me know in the comments. Well, that's because cats were a big deal in Egyptian mythology. They even had their own goddess. Bastet was a cat goddess depicted as a woman with a cat's head. Cats had a meaningful role in ancient Egypt as they protected their food from rats and snakes. They were even seen as family members, and to harm one was punishable by death. Legend says that sometimes cats would enter burning buildings to save their families. If they died, the goddess would bring them back to life, hence the idea of cats having 9 lives. There it is. Now here's where things get confusing. You know that story I told about Ra? Well, apparently Bastet was in the boat with him as well. During the day she would ride with him, and at night she would turn into a cat and then defend the boat from Apophis the snake. But I thought that was Set. So many conflicting things. I saw like a couple different stories who said each thing was different, so who knows. Number 2, Jeb and Nut. Yet another sibling partnership. We have Jeb and Nut. They fell deeply in love and could never be separated. They were that couple who would like constantly be like, oh my god, stop, right next to each other at dinner, you know what I mean? Jeb was the god of the earth and Nut was the god of the sky. A previously mentioned god, Atum, found their union inappropriate, so he pushed Nut into the sky far away from Jeb. He just didn't like being a third wheel. Jeb and Nut were close enough to see each other, but could never hold each other again. And she gave birth to Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Some say Horus too, but I don't think that's true. Number 1, the treasure thief. Okay, I don't know how I feel about this story, okay? This doesn't really feel like harmony is in balance, but anyways. The treasure thief ends in a way I really didn't expect, and I'm not sure you will either. Long ago, a great pharaoh with a wealth of riches decided to build a pyramid in which to keep them safe. One of the builders was wise to his plan and decided to find a way to claim them for himself. He built a stone vault with a hidden entrance covered by a slab so he could get to the riches, but unfortunately he fell ill before he could return, so he told his sons of his plan. The sons headed to the pyramid in the dead of night, following their father's order, but unbeknownst to them, the pharaoh had laid booby traps and one brother was caught in one. Not wanting to be found or interrogated, revealing his other brother, he told his brother to chop his head off. Ugh, that he did. Loyalty? I don't know. The pharaoh, upon finding the body, hung it up in the town square in the hopes of like weeding out whoever's it belonged to. But the other brother, being so clever, got the guards drunk and stole back his brother's body in the dead of night. The pharaoh was like, I'm not even mad, I'm just impressed. He gave the thief a pardon, summoned him to the square, and gave his daughter to marry him. Yeah, dude, you tried to steal my jewels? Don't worry about it. Have my daughter, because you're so talented at your job. Great work.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Ramses II. Ramses II, part 2, you see what I'm doing here. He's considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest pharaoh of the 19th dynasty. Ramses II is still considered the ruler of rulers. It's not a bad title, not bad at all. In year 30 of his reign, Ramses II was ritually transformed into an Egyptian god. Not bad, I'm turning 30 in a few years. I hope someone turns me into a god. Or gets me like a bike, one of the two, I'll take both. So it was only fair that the spoiled pharaoh erected a bunch of statues of himself. Yeah, big selfies. Ramses put up more selfies than any other pharaoh in history. Most famous of them, the temples of Abu Simbel. There lies a monument dedicated to the late Queen Nefertiti and the Ramesseum. We kicked off a part 1 with Ramses signing the first ever peace treaty, so for part 2 we had to show some of the glamour side of him, you know? Number 9, over 100 children. Who is this guy, Nick Cannon? Ramses II is the father to over 100 children. With that, of course, came the 200 wives, otherwise ow and how, if it was just one person. Ow and how, you know? It's guesstimated that Ramses had 96 sons and 60 daughters. Of all those children, Ramses outlived a lot of them. It's almost like living as a king helped, perhaps, maybe, I don't know. Maybe you ate better. Maybe, just a hint. Just an idea. Eventually, Ramses was succeeded by his 13th son with his favorite queen, Queen Nefertari, giving her the fanciest tomb in the Valley of the Queens. Nefertari's tomb contains paintings that some consider are the greatest works of ancient Egyptian art. Not bad, I had like baseball wallpaper on mine growing up. Tomb QV66, he spoiled his lady, look at this. We gotta love him. Her tomb is 520 square meters covered in beautiful art, but in 1904 when Nefertari's tomb was rediscovered, all that was found was her mummified knees. Yeah, all that was left was her kneecaps. What, like, who does this? Raiders had stolen all the treasure prior, sometime in the many moons she had been lying there, and they even took her body and left her knees. Like, what monsters? They're like, yeah, grab the treasure, leave the patellas, let's do it. Number 8, ready to strike. Pharaohs may have looked beautiful living and after death, but they meant business, okay? They were protective of their land, their family, their many lovers and children. The symbol often worn by pharaohs were symbols of power, a Nemes crown. This crown was a striped headcloth and the back of their head was covered with an aureus symbol, aka an upside down cobra. The cobra symbol represents that the pharaoh is always ready and willing to attack their enemies. Attack them with venom. It's a pretty cool symbol. Mine just says DC Etnies shoes. I'm like, this says fight me if anything. DC skate shop on my back. I'm like, yeah, you can just attack me, that's cool. Number 7, King Teti. The Pyramid of Teti was built for the first ruler of the 6th dynasty. While it's not as flashy or massive as other pyramids, inside it contains the oldest writing ever in the religious world, that is. Inside it contains the pyramid texts, these legendary texts. They go all the way back to 2400 BC. The pyramid texts were specifically written so that this king, King Teti, could ascend to the heavens after his death. This isn't bizarre behavior by any means, but King Teti, he was specific. He wanted to be a star. Like a literal star. There are spells and incantations that are in this tomb meant to free the king's soul as he arrives in the cosmos. More specifically for Teti to become a star in the sky and join Osiris and Orion in the #God Squad. There's even instructions on how to preserve the body and travel to these heavens. It's one thing to be buried with your gold, then you can live another life, but to become a star, I need to expand my dreams, my gosh. King Teti was onto something here. When I go, in my will, I'm gonna be like, can I become a star? Is that possible? Can I just throw me up into the heavens? Can I do that? Or bury me, that's cool. Bury me in Ajax, that works. Number 6, Yozer. For this one, we're looking into some bull worshipping. So if you're a fan of bulls, here, this one's perfect for you, weirdly enough. Just north of the step pyramid of Pharaoh Dozier, archaeologist Auguste Mariette discovered this site in 1851. The Serapeum. It's a temple dedicated to the Egyptian deity Serapis, and it's a combination of Osiris and Apis in human form. This was a large burial ground for the Apis bulls, these bulls that were said to be sacred, of course, and after their death, they would become immortal. Immortal bulls, that sounds badass. and also terrifying. That's very scary. Don't wear red around these guys. Tonight at Saqqara, there's a massive vault. It's 382 yards long, and it's carved out of sandstone bedrock. It's huge, and along the sides, there's 24 chambers, each with a sarcophagus carved out of a single chunk of granite. Just impossible craftsmanship all around, especially at these times. Like, oh my god, my wrists are tired just typing about this, let alone doing this. Inside these boxes were animal remains, bones and all that jazz, but back in those times, you weren't allowed to break up any bodies. You had to mummify them, right? Hence part 1 and where we are now. How are these tombs built so perfectly, weighing over 80 tons? And also, where do these bones come from? I have so many questions. Maybe on part 3 we'll answer them.
Number 5, the plow. Back in the day when we started to move away from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle to more of a work the land and make a new farm lifestyle, Omari would go out into the field with his hoe and cultivate his land by hand. As you can imagine, this takes a hell of a long time, but we're a problem-solving species. That's why we got to where we are now. Enter the plow and the evolution of agriculture. So basically, you take your 2 favorite oxen and you connect them together, and you connect them to a beam of wood that shoots out behind to the plow handle and to the blade of the plow that would go into the ground and be dragged behind by the ox, breaking up the ground. All the farmer has to do is sow the seed. This simple invention changed everything, and it's still used in places where machinery is just unaffordable.
Number 4, the calendar. No one would blame you if in the last 2 years you forgot what day it was. I know after spending a lot of time inside, I forgot what day it was, but every day is a Saturday when you eat spicy chicken wings in your tighty whities. Well, the Egyptians may have had one of the first calendars, and a gosh darn good one too. Their calendar had 12 months and over 300 days. The trouble is, after a while it kinda got a little inaccurate. They did their best to fix it. I mean, clearly if you look at the calendar, clearly it's the 5th of, well, I think that looks like 3 men walking in sand. And next month we have a special festival happening. It looks like it'll be a sunny day on the 12th of man with ball on his hat. Hieroglyphs are hard, man, I don't know.
Number 3, clocks. Alright, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you the Egyptians invented the modern clock. No. But they did have to tell time, and as any dad or survival guru will tell you, the most reliable way to tell what time of the day it is would be that massive floating ball of plasma in the sky, the sun. Assuming it isn't a super cloudy day or anything. The obelisks we see in Egypt were not just fancy deco pieces. They were actually sun clocks, used to see how the sun would cast shadows throughout different times of the day. They even used it to figure out which days were longer and shorter. There was an even more interesting clock though, a water clock. It was basically a stone vessel with a tiny little hole at the bottom which allowed water to drip at a constant rate. The water marks spaced out at different levels would tell you how many hours had passed. This one's good because it worked at night and on cloudy days as well.
Number 2, mummification.
Welcome back to the land of the living, my friend. You've been gone for quite some time. Oh.
Yes, the process of mummification, probably the number 1 thing ancient Egypt is known for, maybe besides the pyramids. While not the only civilization of the past to practice this, they kinda ran the show here. Basically, the pharaoh's corpse has to stay fresh so their soul can make it into the afterlife. The heart stays, but everything else is like a furniture after a bad divorce. It must go. The brain was stirred up like a family reunion square dance and drained like last night's punch bowl. But wait, horror fans, there's more. Lungs, liver, bladder, intestines, stomach, kidney, and basically anything you can scoop out with your favorite ice cream scoop is going. But don't toss them out though. Some of these organs were preserved in jars. Makes nice decorations beside the piles of gold found in the tombs.
Yes, my liver jars. Oh, yes.
Number 1, cosmetic makeup. The ancient Egyptians created makeup as far back as 4000 BC. That's a long time ago. And that's how long we've been obsessed with our looks. Yikes. Their makeup actually served more of a purpose than just looking good though. The eye makeup they used specifically was believed to cure eye diseases, which wasn't true, and would protect them from the evil eye, which, I don't know, could have been true. Kind of like the ink, they would use soot, but they would combine it with a lead mineral called galena to create a black substance they called coal. That's K-H-O-L, not C-O-A-L. They had multiple colors actually. They would make green makeup by combining malachite with galena. Now, if you saw our bizarre beauty products and history video, you probably know that lead, even lead minerals like galena, aren't really great for you. But hey, anything in the name of looking good.
Number 10 on our countdown, the wax crocodile, will be presented in a story form. Once upon a time, as all good stories begin, a pharaoh, accompanied by his counselors and servants, paid a visit to the villa of his chief scribe, behind which there was a garden with a stately summer house and a broad artificial lake. One of the servants of the pharaoh was a handsome young man who catches the eye of the scribe's wife. She sends him gifts, and they begin to have secret meetings at the summer house and swim in its lake. The chief butler informs the scribe of his wife's affair, and the scribe in turn asks the butler to bring him a magic box. Inside was a small wax crocodile that he placed in the hands of his butler, saying, "Cast this image into the lake behind the youth when he next bathes himself." The lovers were together in the lake the next day, and the butler stealthily put the wax croc into the water, which immediately gave it life. It became a great crocodile that seized the handsome man suddenly and took him away. 7 days passed, and the scribe tells the pharaoh of the wonder that had been done and made a request his majesty should accompany him to the villa lake. The pharaoh did so, and when they both stood beside the lake in the garden, the scribe spoke magic words bidding the crocodile to appear, and as he commanded, so did it do. The great reptile came out of the water carrying the handsome man in its jaws. The pharaoh was filled with wonder, and the scribe related on to him what had happened while the handsome man stood waiting. Could have taken his chance to run, but I guess not. The pharaoh bids on to the crocodile once again to take the handsome man into the depths, and neither are ever seen again. Then the pharaoh gave the command that the wife of the scribe should be seized, and on the north side of the house she was bound to a stake and burned alive. Now, if you want to hear more wild stories like this, I recommend you subscribe to The Hive. For number 9, let's talk about the lore of the Catwoman god. Cats were very important to the ancient Egyptians and were even considered to be demi-deities. Not only did they protect the crops and slow the spread of disease by killing rodents, but they were also thought to be the physical form of the goddess Bastet, the Egyptian goddess of domesticity, childbirth, the home, women's secrets, women's physical pleasure, fertility, and of course, cats. It's for this reason she's depicted as a slender and lanky woman with a cat's head. Bastet was the daughter of Ra, the sister of Sekhmet, the wife of Ptah, and the mother of Mihos. It's believed that every day she would ride through the sky with her father, the sun god, and watch over and protect him. At night she would turn into a cat and continue her duty of protecting Ra, but from his greatest enemy, the serpent Apep. And since we're already talking about it, number 8 will be the serpent Apep. According to the legend, Apep was a powerful serpent deity who resided in the underworld and embodied the universe's destruction and chaos. Each night, when Ra's sun boat had to pass through the underworld before re-emerging at dawn, Apep would absolutely hound the ship in an attempt to prevent the sun from rising. Ra, the sun god and king of the gods, fought Apep every night, and the battle was always extremely intense, required all the other gods' help, and lasted the whole night. So to aid Ra in battle, the Egyptians would build wax representations of Apep and melt them in the sun. Finally, it's Bastet who conquers and destroys the serpent Apep. During one of these nightly battles, Bastet, being the goddess of cats, aided in Apep's defeat by utilizing her powers in a different way than she'd done before. Assuming the form of a lioness, she jumps the serpent, shredding him to pieces and scattering the bones over the underworld. From then on, Ra was tormented nightly no longer. For number 7, you're going to hear the oldest origin of Cinderella and her red slipper. Rhodopis, as she's known to modern storytellers, was a Thracian Egyptian woman slighted by fate and rewarded by royalty. First sold in Aegea, Rhodopis is passed through owners before winding up in Egypt. The Egyptian man who possesses her treats her incredibly fair. He gives her lovely homes, lavish her with other gifts, but he spent most of his time sleeping. So she's sitting on the bank of the Canopic Nile watching robes when a falcon suddenly snatches her sandal. Rhodopis is in awe, for she knew it was the god Horus who had taken her shoe, but wondering what the Horus appearance could mean. Unbeknownst to her, however, the falcon had taken it to Memphis and dropped the sandal in the lap of none other than the pharaoh Amasis himself. Possessed by the sandal's simplicity but beautiful red color and being an obvious sign from the god Horus, the king sent his men in all directions of the country in quest of the woman who wore it. According to Greek geographer and historian Strabo in his geography book 17.33, she was found in the city of Naucratis. Hearing the trumpets and gongs of the emperor, she had hidden in the bushes while other girls tried to force their feet into her sandal. But the emperor spots her and requests she come out and try it. Naturally, Cinderella style, it only fits her, and she pulled the matching one from her robes. The pharaoh and Rhodopis are united by the god Horus, and the servant girl becomes the next queen of Egypt, to whom Herodotus, Diodorus, and Strabo say the third pyramid of Giza was attributed to. For number 6, we're getting another Grecian-influenced myth, that of Oedipus and the Sphinx. So, the legend of the Sphinx is a famous Egyptian myth about a creature with the head of a human woman and the body body of a lion. Sometimes the Sphinx is also depicted to have wings, but that's more of a Greco-Roman component. According to the story, the Sphinx was said to have been sent by the sun god Ra to guard the entrance of the city of Thebes. The Sphinx naturally, as you may know, guarded Thebes not only with its might, but with its mind, presenting a riddle for all those who approached it. And to anyone who could not answer the riddle, they would be killed. What was the riddle? What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? If you don't know the answer yet, I actually encourage you to pause the video and try some guesses before we continue. Let's see if the Sphinx would give you the slice and dice. Okay, so the answer is, drumroll please, a human who crawls on all 4s as a baby, walks on 2 legs as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. Tricky, right? So the myth goes that a young prince named Oedipus, yes, the one who marries and does stuff with his mom, came upon the Sphinx while traveling, and he asked the riddle. Oedipus was the first person to be able to answer correctly, which angered and confused the crap out of the Sphinx, causing it to take its own life in a panic. However, some versions of the myth, the Sphinx was said to have been turned to stone by the gods.
Number 5. Luxor Tomb. We've been saying 2,500 years ago, and don't get me wrong, that's an awful long time to go. But in 2014, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old tomb from the 11th dynasty, tucked away in Luxor, Egypt, of course, as this list says. Spanish archaeologists found a tomb belonging to a leader from the 11th dynasty, and it's pretty obvious that this was somebody from the royal family or somebody who was a high-ranking official, because at the time, Luxor was the capital city of ancient Egypt, and officials also believed this tomb could have been used as a mass grave. The important thing to note here is that the tomb had also been used during the 17th dynasty, because tools and utensils from that later time were also found in this grave. We're gonna find a spork in 5,000 years and be like, ah yes, ancient tools, interesting. Number 4. 210 sarcophagi. So we thought it was a pretty big deal when 160 bodies were recently discovered in Egypt. This was back in September 2020. Over 160 coffins were found. Wild, right? Well, those are rookie numbers, turns out. For this one, archaeologists found 210 sarcophagi near Queen Nefertiti's funerary temple in the city of the dead, Saqqara. Yeah, there were over 160, surprise. Maybe next time you check in with us, that number will be even higher. Who knows? Hopefully, / maybe hopefully not. I don't know how I feel about this. This was January 2021. We probably would have seen it on the news, but that was when 768 people were storming the Capitol, so the news was a bit busy, I guess. Thanks. These sealed coffins were untouched for thousands of years. They went from finding 160 to finding 210. That's incredible. According to the ministry, the sarcophagi were completely closed and haven't been opened since they were buried at all. They opened a few though, of course, just to analyze and display them, but that's it. Yeah, leave the rest. I'm not focused on ancient curses or Brendan Fraser having to come out and save the day. Just let dead people lay where they are. Let them rest. The amount of effort gone into hiding and preserving their memory alone, I mean, look how long it's taken for us to even find these things. It's almost like they didn't want to be found. Number 3, the ancient curse. The walls of some of these tombs have warnings from the gods, which is a lot. One of them warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose. Also, if I walked into somebody's property now and it said trespassers' necks will be wrung out like a goose, I would turn back. I wouldn't want to investigate further. I would just walk away. You don't need to be an ancient god to get that message across, you know what I mean? But inside the found tomb of the vizier Ankhamor, a pharaoh's official from 4,000 years ago, a curse was written. Buried in a mastaba, an above-ground massive tomb, was this warning. Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property. It also warns of the vizier's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing a ghost. Yeah, there's that, or beware of dog. I don't know, you can pick which is more impactful on your property, sure. Number 2, the animal tombs. This tomb was found, as you may have guessed, in the Valley of the Kings. You're getting good, nice. But this one doesn't sound like the rest. I mean, for starters, it's a number rather than a name. What in the Elon Musk is happening here? Whose name was a number, huh? KV52 was discovered in 1906 by Edward Ayrton. Tomb KV50, KV51, and this one, KV52, they all form a group referred to as the animal tombs. Underneath 6 feet of debris, the entrance to these vaults were found, so when we enter this tomb, specifically KV52, that's been untouched, ideally for thousands of years, we can look forward to finding anything. In fact, whatever we do find, it's a win. It helps complete this age-long puzzle. So when officials opened KV52 and it was completely empty, well, that doesn't feel too nice. Something here is wrong. It was empty except for 2 boxes. Both were black and undecorated, which is odd considering what we've learned on this list. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a canopic chest that had 4 compartments in it. Hauntingly bare compared to what else we've seen on this list, but it gets a little better. We're not done yet. Finally, number 1, Queen Nefertiti's hidden chamber. When researchers are 90% sure about something, that's a pretty good sign. You only say you're 90% sure of something when you know for sure. You leave 10% in case anything else goes wrong out of your control, right? 90%, that's confident, we got this. So when Egyptian authorities said they're 90% sure there's a hidden chamber in King Tut's tomb, well, we got a little jazzed. Got some jazz hands going on. Not gold, jazz hands. Back in 2015, a paper was published on the burial of Queen Nefertiti. Archaeologist Nicholas Reeves argued that while conducting scans on the ancient site, Reeves found what resembled traces of doors beneath the plaster. Now, it's been considered previously by archaeologists that King Tut's mask, having ear piercings and all, suggests that at that time, that tomb and that death mask was actually meant for Queen Nefertiti, not King Tut. But because King Tut died suddenly when he was 19, plans had to quickly change. 90% sure is good enough for me. What do you guys think? Comment down below all your thoughts. Kicking off the list at number 10, KV 55. Located in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, Tomb 55, otherwise known as KV 55, was found by Edward Arden back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb, and the reason we call this tomb by a number rather than name is because we really don't know who was inside it yet. Even the walls outside of the tomb, they aren't covered with any hieroglyphs to tip us off or give us any hints. It's just bare, which is kind of eerie. As you walk down the 20 steps towards KV 55, you'll notice markings on the entrance, markings that show that the entrance was widened since it was first cut, along with its ceilings being raised higher. So whatever was in there needed the room. The only hint as to who was buried remains on the walls. One hieroglyph remains, and it was discovered in 1907, and it translates to, "The evil one that shall not live again." Even these massive stones were built in order to prevent anything from getting out. See, usually with these ancient tombs, it's the opposite. The description for who's inside the tomb had also been destroyed. So we have no idea who or what is in KV 55. Number 9, King Teti. The Pyramid of Teti was built for the first ruler of the 6th dynasty, and while it's not flashy or massive as these other pyramids, the insides contain the oldest writing in the religious world. Pretty insane. Now these texts go back to 2400 BC, way back when we used, BBM. The pyramid texts were specifically written so that this King Teti could ascend to the heavens after his death. There are spells and incantations meant to free the king's soul and arrive in the cosmos, more specifically for Teti to become a star in the sky and then join Osiris and Orion in the God Squad. There's even instructions on how to preserve the body and travel to said heavens. World's oldest instruction manual for the win. Number 8, Queen Nefertiti. After a scan was done on King Tut's tomb, there were cracks found on the north and earth walls. East, Taylor, east, not earth. There were cracks found on the north and east side walls, so we believe that this is a secret passageway to Queen Nefertiti, the ruler during the 14th century BC, and also wife to King Tut. Queen Nefertiti's parents are also still unknown to this day, so that adds to it. And with ancient texts depicting that these kings and queens would leave Earth and then later return, perhaps they are both descendants of extraterrestrials. And this flying sun disk that they worshipped was not the sun, but rather a winged alien ancestor. Number 7, Dozer. For this one, we're looking into some bull worshipping, so grab your red scarves and start waving them around. Just north of the step pyramid of the Pharaoh Dozer, archaeologist August Marionnette discovered this site in 1851. The Serapeum is a temple dedicated to the Egyptian deity Serapis, a combination of Osiris and Apis in human form. Now, this was a large burial ground for the Apis bulls. They were basically these bulls that were said to be sacred, and after their death, they would become immortal. Remember that, that's important. Today at Saqqara, there's this massive vault. It's 382 yards long, and it's carved out of sandstone bedrock. It's massive, and along the sides of them are 24 chambers, each with sarcophagus carved out of a single chunk of granite. Now inside these boxes were animal remains, just bones and all. But back then in those times, you weren't allowed to break up any bodies. That was a no-go. You had to mummify them. So how are these tombs built, first of all, so perfectly, weighing over 80 tons, and where do these bones come from? Perhaps these are the remains of the Apis bull. After all, that's the inspiration for the Minotaurs, so maybe alien ancestors looked a lot more jacked than we may think. Number 6, dung beetles. This one isn't exactly a pharaoh at all, but it's too good to leave out, especially if we're talking about aliens here. It's important. Dung beetles, also known as scarabs, are the only species in the entire world that follows the Milky Way. Think about that for a second. Let's talk about it. Some animals follow the sun. Turtles sprint to the ocean the second they're born to avoid getting plucked up by birds. Now these insects would follow the line of the Milky Way and then roll their towards it. Literally, their poop, they would roll it towards the skies, which is insane. Symbols of these beetles are seen all over, either in hieroglyphics or even in movies. Their presence is known. Near the sacred lake at the Temple of Karnak, there's a massive scarab monument. And there's even a legend still to this day behind said statue that if you walk around it 9 times, you would find health, wealth, and love. And you'd also probably be a little bit dizzy. The scarab is there to represent the god Khepri, which at the time Egyptians believed was the sun as well. Also known as the scarab-faced god, which terrifying when you imagine that. Are these bugs just trying to get home into space to their bug alien master? Why does he need so much poop? Whatever DIY project they're working on in the Milky Way probably doesn't smell too good.
Number 5, bloodletting. The practice of bloodletting was common all over the world, but it may have gotten its start in ancient Egypt. It's a quite simple procedure, really. Black bile out of whack? Lose some blood. Can't stop coughing and sneezing? Drain some blood. Been possessed by demons and now they curse and haunt you as they run up and down your bloodstream? Drain some blood. The question is, however, was this really helping? The short answer, no. No, it wasn't. Besides feeling lightheaded and going pale, this didn't really achieve much, since the days of old were filled with all kinds of other ailments that would easily end someone's life before the spooky demons running up and down someone's bloodstream ever would. I don't feel good. Oh, we better bleed Grandpa again. I don't know, like what? Number 4, plastic surgery. Hey, there's nothing wrong with a little cosmetic surgery. I for one feel that if it'll make you feel better, go for it. Feel better about yourself. Do it. I don't think there's any shame in that. It's been around for a long time, so long that ancient Egyptians might have come up with the first nose jobs. Obviously not like the ones today, but they were knowledgeable in surgeries. After all, you open the chest cavity of a dozen kings and you jot some stuff down on some papyrus, you learn a thing or two. More interesting than shaving down your own beak, however, was their implementation of the prosthesis limbs. Yes, all the way back then. One mummy was actually found with a fake toe. When tested in the modern day with period-accurate sandals, it proved to work quite well and moved more efficiently than first thought. Again, for the time, this was pretty advanced. Number 3, the Ode of the Nile. Imagine people working all day in the blistering sands of Egypt, where the sun beams down on you like, well, the sun in the desert, lifting massive rocks and carving them to shape. I don't know about you guys, but I would be sweating. And that also means I wouldn't be smelling too fresh, resembling that of a high school locker room. Yuck. Well, the Egyptians knew this was an issue, so they came up with what was probably the first underarm deodorant, using nice herbs and other items that had pleasant aromas, and stuck them where the odor was coming from. In your armpits. I just know that after a long day of hard labor in the sun, I would need more than cinnamon sticks and lavender to tame the odor of my sweaty lumberjack armpits. That's just how it goes. Number 2, the Egyptian Brazilian. The 70s have come and gone, and a popular trend today is to be hairless. Everywhere. Even in places where you didn't think it was possible to grow hair when you were younger. Egyptians took it upon themselves to remove all their hair. Well, at least most of it. Not because the Nile River had nice beaches, but because of lice. Oh, yuck. While not an exact cure for the itchy bugs that plague schools across America, it did seem to help. And if you've ever had lice before, you know how bad that sucks. I had them once. It was the worst. Cut my hair, shape my head. Lots of baths. It's no fun, man. I'm too cute for that. I don't want that. Number 1, Wario breath. Wow. Okay. It makes sense that Egyptians would come up with breath mints and mouthwash. They fed their laborers diets of foods that contained a lot of onions and garlic. Sure, I'm just like everyone else who cooks. And when the recipe asks for 1 onion, maybe I put in 2. When it asks for 2 cloves of garlic, maybe I put in 4. You gotta love that flavor. It was thought that they help fight off disease, and they were kinda right. However, after eating all that flavor, your breath would be something rancid. So herbs and mints were used to help quell the breath that could peel the paint off of walls. Thank God.
Number 10, men's time of the month. Ancient Egypt was plagued with diseases. While the Egyptians were actually pretty advanced in terms of their medical sciences and cures for said diseases, there were still a bunch that people had no defense for. In particular, schistosomiasis infected nearly everyone at the time. This is an illness that makes people feel sick and causes our red to appear often in the toilet. It was actually so common that they didn't even realize it was a disease. Ancient Egyptians got schistosomiasis so often that they just thought it was a natural part of growing up. They accepted that men had to menstruate just like women do, and they accepted the red vino on tap coming out of their bodies was a normal part of growing up. Number 9, Kinda rude. In ancient Egypt, those born with dwarfism were actually well accepted in society. Their recorded daily activities suggest assimilation into daily life, and their disorder was not shown as a physical handicap. Wisdom writings and moral teachings in ancient Egypt commanded respect for dwarves and other individuals with disabilities. But one thing I read online suggested that if you were born with dwarfism, you certainly did not have to worry about unemployment. Usually, this is because in ancient Egypt, little people were often hired to work in security-sensitive jobs, specifically those who worked with gold. This didn't actually apply only to those with dwarfism, but others with obvious physical characteristics that helped them stand out. These people were considered to be the best candidates for this kind of work because if a worker stole anything, they were very easily found and promptly arrested. Number 8, me and all my friends. Every time a First Dynasty king bit the dust back in ancient Egypt, a whole lot of people went with him. Egyptians were famously almost more obsessed with their lives after they passed on than they were with their actual lives, and a passed away king needed his retinue to support him in the afterlife. It was a shocking show of power. For example, almost 600 other people were found buried with King Jur. When a king went, hundreds went with him, but those who were taken out this way would not necessarily feel that they were being unceremoniously taken. Those servants who were sent to bite the dust and be buried with their masters were considered privileged to be allowed to follow a powerful figure into the afterlife to serve them. However, it was still likely nerve-wracking to know that your fate was tied to the random passing of a person that you worked for. Egyptian royalty stopped this practice early in the First Dynasty, but it may have continued in a more innocent form, with the Egyptians burying mummies with little carved figurines that could magically serve the deceased in the afterlife. Number 7, sunburn. In ancient Egypt, one of the most awful crimes that you could commit was any form of offense or disrespect toward the sun god. If you vandalized or robbed a temple, committed any form of personal disrespect, or were otherwise found guilty of any offense related to the sun god, you were usually sentenced to be set on fire. This punishment was only reserved for the greatest of offenses and was usually accompanied by a ritual that committed the act to the gods. While the ancient Egyptians rarely practiced actual sacrifices, this was one of the few exceptions. While burning is painful enough to begin with, it was considered the most horrific way to go of all the ancient Egyptians because of the ritual significance of the act. They believed strongly in preserving the physical body for life after passing, and believed that destroying the person's physical body completely by burning would leave them with no vessel in the afterlife. Now, while the gods could still technically intervene to help this person out, it was about as terrifying a punishment as a believer in ancient Egyptian society could imagine. Number 6, sandwich paper. Okay, so this moment isn't actually from ancient Egypt, but it has to do with ancient Egypt, and it is pretty disturbing. There was a time in the early 1900s when anything involving ancient Egypt was considered a fad. Mummies were imported to Europe to be unwrapped at parties, and many mummies were illegally smuggled out of ancient Egypt. The truth is, there were a lot of mummies around, and no one really felt much respect for them. Even at the time, very little proper historical significance was attributed to them. For this reason, getting hold of mummy bandages was not only cheap, but in some cases, cheaper than paper. An enterprising businessman in the United States decided that he could save some money making wrapping paper for food, and imported some old brown mummy paper to do the trick. Unfortunately for him, his plan failed when people started catching cholera, and the use of mummy paper to wrap food was promptly abandoned when it shouldn't have even started in the first place.
Number 5, fake beards. I can't grow a beard, so maybe I'll just start rocking the fake one, you know, like Hatshepsut. Long before Cleopatra, Hatshepsut was the first woman to obtain power as a pharaoh. She was the 6th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. There were just a few that were women in total, but during her reign back in the mid-1400s BC, following the death of Thutmose II, she was determined on being portrayed as a male. The pharaoh, fake beard, the massive muscles, historians believe that this was all done as an act of politics. After her passing, come 1458 BC, her stepson took the throne, Thutmose III, and he destroyed everything in her name and image. Well, mostly everything. Now we have this bearded pharaoh that we're pretty sure we figured out. Number 4, acne. Ancient Egyptians came up with an interesting method on getting rid of those pimples, that's for sure. Remind you, this was long before Dr. Pimple Popper was ever a thing, so Again, creative. Physicians back then discussed pimples as these elevated spots with black tops that can plague your skin from 4 to 5 years. And by squeezing these spots, you force out the maggot inside. Yeah, blackheads were called maggots back then. Imagine your partner, hey, can you get this pimple on my back? Yeah, I think I got some maggots in there. I don't know. I'd be sick. See ya. Now we're single. They would refer to severe cases of acne as maggots that lie in a bed of roses. Hey, if a physician ever told me I had maggots that lie in a bed of roses on my persons, I would faint. That's the scariest news I've ever heard in my life. That's some bad news, man. Dermatological disorders were thought to be human skin taking on the properties of animals. Yeah. Oh, you have acne? Are you sure you're not turning into a bird? Maybe it's that. Come back next week. Ancient Egyptians would use honey, vinegar, turpentine, and emulsion of bitter almonds, all to get rid of acne, hopefully. Sorry, maggots, not acne, maggots. All to get rid of maggots. I'm gonna go throw up. Number 3, prosthetics. The ancient Egyptians were a culture of firsts, and some of their achievements we still have no idea how they were able to accomplish. Like the pyramids, I couldn't tell you. Could you? Didn't think so. Hit that thumbs up. We're both wrong. We're both learning. It's very likely that some of the first ever prosthetics were used in ancient Egypt. How fascinating. Imagine being the first guy to make a toe, a fake toe. A female mummy who was discovered near Luxor had her death dated somewhere between 950 and 710 BCE. And she was also found with a prosthetic toe made from wood and leather on her person. While this of course is a wonderful cosmetic replacement, and it's no secret that the ancient Egyptians certainly valued aesthetics, it seems as though this prosthetic toe was completely functional and was actually used to help this woman walk. The toe, after it was discovered, had significant signs of wear and tear, which then inspired experts to start a study, look a little further. And they did. So they took participants and tested their gait, both with and without the use of a replicated toe. And in ancient Egypt, the common footwear were sandals, and walking in them would have been next to impossible without a big toe. So it's clear that this prosthetic was very helpful and important to those similar to this Luxor mummy. Not exactly a beauty practice, but I'm sure they also felt a little more confident with that toe. This is also too impressive to exclude. Beauty list. I'm like, yeah, toes are beautiful. Why not? Throw them on. Number 2, henna. I got henna done a few years ago and I totally blanked. I forgot that it lasted longer than like 2 days. I was like, day 4, I'm like, what's going on, man? Is this permanent? While on one hand, pun intended, it is beautiful, ancient Egyptians' use of henna went beyond style and beyond imaging oneself after the gods. See, henna also has cooling effects on the body, and ancient Egypt was quite hot. It was used by ancient Egyptians to color their hair and fingernails in shades of red and orange. Now this exact shade also provided comfort on hot days. Come back with some henna. Kind of nice. It lasts longer than a few days though, just so you know if you want to get henna. It's important to know. That guy did not tell me in Greece. No, he did not. And finally, number 1, deodorant. When it comes to deodorant, today we listen to the Old Spice guy. He's always whistling about something new. But long before he was born, ancient Egyptians used ostrich eggs for deodorant. They made perfumes and oils, this is commonly known, but they were also the first to use any type of a deodorant, like underarm deodorant. It was so impressive. Ostrich eggs mixed with a little fat and tamarisk and tortoise shell and then nuts, mix them all together and bam, there you go. You're ready for date night. Just apply all of that on your body. Another method was a little more yummy than ostrich eggs and nuts. See, Egyptians would also use porridge balls. How creative is that? Flavored porridge rolled up and safely tucked in your underarm right there on your little smelly chicken wing. This morning I had some deodorant just crumble apart when I was applying it. You ever have that happen? Turns to feta cheese all of a sudden mid-application. Now my bathroom sink looks like a Greek salad. Smells great, but not practical. Might have to go back to the porridge ball method. Who knows? Maybe I have one right now. Maybe that's why I haven't moved this arm the whole time. Who knows?
We're gonna start with the latest and the greatest. Number 10 is the latest Saqqara discoveries. So on January 26th of 2023, after a year-long excavation of the notorious Saqqara necropolis, 2 ancient tombs that date back to the 5th and 6th dynasty of the Old Kingdom are unveiled to the public. Zahi Hawass, who isn't my favorite person to cite, gave a statement on one of the mummies found. Kanohe Dedefe was an inspector of officials, supervisor of nobles, and a priest in the pyramid complex of Unas. Mary had many titles, one of them being the Keeper of Secrets, which is a title you'll hear again later in this video. This would also be a great time to take a second and subscribe to The Hive if you're a fan of discoveries such as these. Also found was a stone sarcophagus with a mummified man named Fatek. But the most important of the dusty corpses found was a gold leaf covered mummy. Hecatophis was found down a 15-meter burial shaft inside a large large rectangular limestone sarcophagus. While other mummies have been found with this unusual coating choice, Hekashepes gets to take seniority. This mummy is the oldest complete mummy covered in gold, Hawass said in an interview, having led the excavation himself. The excavation team also found dozens of other valuable artifacts, including statues, some of which still have their original paint intact, as well as amulets, coins, earrings, rings, and tablets, all of which are currently being displayed at the Step Pyramid of Hauser in Saqqara. Number 9 is the tomb special of collecting crocs. Archaeologists excavating the Theban necropolis in Egypt made an extraordinary but unusual discovery, which was announced on December 20th of 2022. 9 crocodile heads placed inside 2 tombs belonging to high-ranking nobles. Archaeologist Patrick Chudzik told the Newsweek that the discovery was the first of its kind, as crocodile remains have never been discovered inside the tombs of Egypt, despite usually being found inside of temples or special catacombs. Dr. Chudzik explains, in our case, things are different. Firstly, only the heads and not the entire bodies of these Nile reptiles have been deposited in these tombs where we work. Secondly, they were not mummified, only wrapped in linen. There is a significant difference in this, as no preservatives were used. Finally, the remains were found in the tombs of humans, not catacombs of sacred animals. The tombs belonged to 2 top officials during the reign of the pharaoh Nehefetre Mentuhotep II, one being the Chancellor Cheti, a high official, but the occupant of the second tomb is actually still anonymous to us. Placing of the crocodile heads in the tombs, according to Dr. Chudzik, certainly was unusual, but not entirely unprecedented. He believes that earlier researchers paid scant attention to such finds that depict cultural practices but weren't treasures, stating that it's likely similar offerings had been placed in quite a few other tombs of rich individuals, but those offerings were discarded by the earlier researchers who discovered them. Number 8 is about the Ramessid Cemetery. So in April of 2023, the joint Dutch-Italian archaeological mission of the Saqqara archaeological site discovered the tomb of a person called Banhishia from the Ramessid period, the chief servant of the tomb of Aten. Alongside his tomb was the discovery of 4 small chapels, reinforcing the previous theories that suggest the reuse of the space between the tombs of the 18th dynasty in later eras and the constructions of tombs and chapels in that area during the Ramessid period of Egypt. The cemetery is a self-contained temple, having its own entrance and inner courtyard, as well as an underground burial chamber. Oddly, 2 out of those 4 chapels I mentioned were in dedication of a person that they don't recognize, called Yo-Yo. Endless inscriptions and scenes on the walls are distinguished by their accuracy and quality of detail. One in particular shows a scene of funerary procession of Yo-Yo in the process of reviving his mummy again in the hereafter to live in the afterlife as a god, in addition to a scene depicting the cow goddess Hathor and a boat of the god Sekhara, the god of the underworld. Inside the tomb, the mission found a stela picturing of Banhasi and his wife Baya, the singer of Amun, before a table of sacrifice and several drawings of priests and animals. While some have warriors, others have the terracotta inscriptions, which is number 7. The Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced another discovery in Saqqara, March 17th, 2022. As the title of the video reveals, it's very obviously tombs, specifically 5 of them. All burials date to either Old Kingdom or the first transition/intermediate period, roughly 4,700 to 4,000 years ago. All belong to top officials and dignitaries from respective time periods and are in good state of preservation. Deity, one of the top nobles of the court, had a well-defined pathway leading to his burial room, with the walls adorned with engraved pictures of many funeral scenes painted in bright terracotta and sandstones. Artistically, the colors of the paintings are considered royal colors by officials. Grave number 2 belonged to the wife of a man named Yart. Meanwhile, grave number 3 belonged to a person named Babi Farahafe, who used to occupy several important court positions, namely supervisor of the Great House, the chanting priest, and the cleaner of the house. The 5th cemetery is a man called Hanu, had many titles such as the mayor, and the 6th grave, however, is the most interesting of them, as it has the archaeologist a little giddy. A woman called Betty, who is responsible for the king's makeup, appearance, and dressing, and was buried with tons of her cosmetic tools. Allegedly, she is also a priestess of Hathor, who's the goddess of love, beauty, music, fertility, and pleasure. You want to hear something crazy? Number 6 is how they cracked open a tomb and found 100 sealed coffins. It was announced on the 14th of November 2020. It's the largest find of that year. It's 100 sealed coffins and over 40 statues alongside hundreds of mixed artifacts. Naturally, they're discovered at the Saqqara necropolis, and carbon dating tells us that the items terms date back to the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled Egypt for some 300 years from about 320 BC to 30 BC and the late period. The coffins were found inside a burial shaft that had not been opened at all for 2,500 years. The preliminary studies revealed quickly that most of these coffins belonged to 26th dynasty priests, top officials, and elites. A number of wooden statues and colored gilded masks were also found, all in really great condition, and 28 of the statuettes are Ptah Sokar, the main god of the Saqqara necropolis. But there's one very special and unusual statue in this tomb, a bronze statue of the god Nefertiti. The statue is inlaid with valuable precious stones. We're talking red agate, turquoise, jade, and lapis lazuli. It is 35 centimeters tall and has the name of its owner, Badia Munis, engraved in its base like Andy in Toy Story.
Number 5. Exile. Exile as a form of punishment was applied in ancient Egypt for certain offenses. It involved banishing an individual from their community or region as a means of punishment and deterrent. Exile was one of the various punitive measures used in the legal systems of ancient Egypt. Exile served as several purposes in ancient Egypt, including punishment, deterrence, and the maintenance of social order. It was viewed as a way to remove individuals who had violated societal norms or committed offenses from the immediate community. The duration of the exile could vary, as some individuals might permanently be banished from their community, while others might face a specific time period of exile which they could actually return. But if you didn't have a calendar on you, it might be a bit tough for you to figure out when you were supposed to come back. Number 4. Retribution. Retribution in ancient Egypt was a concept embedded in the legal and social framework, particularly in cases of serious crimes such as death. Retribution was closely tied to the principles of justice, divine order, as we mentioned earlier, which is ma'at, the belief that the balance and harmony needed to be maintained in the universe. In cases of these killings, the principle of retribution was often applied. Family members of the victim might even have a say in determining the fate of the offender, sometimes seeking revenge or just accepting compensation. This compensation might also involve the offender providing goods, money, or other assets to the victim's family as a means of seeking forgiveness and restoring balance. Retribution was seen as a way of maintaining ma'at, which encompasses the concept of truth, justice, and cosmic balance. Offenses against ma'at, particularly heinous crimes like killings, were believed to be upset the divine order and required corrective measures to restore harmony. Number 3. Corporal punishment. Like in all the ones listed above, there is one thing you need to know, and that there are no lawyers in ancient Egypt. A suspect was interrogated by the police, and the judge in court and witness were brought to testify for or against the accused. Since the prevailing belief that a person who had been charged was guilty until proven innocent, witnesses were often beaten to make sure that they were telling the truth. Once one has been charged with a crime, even if one was finally found innocent, one's name was still kept on record as having been a suspect. As such, public disgrace seems to have been a great deterrent as any other punishment. Even one that were completely exonerated of all wrongdoing, one would still be known as the community as a former suspect, so it's still sus. Corporal punishment such as whipping or beating was administered for these certain crimes, and the severity of the physical punishment might correspond to the seriousness of the offense. Number 2. Capital punishment. Law asserted its autonomy as early as the age of the pyramids, whereas the role of religion in legal matters began to diminish. Religion then no longer determined the legal standing of a matter, but it was rather a judicial mechanism which became authoritative, even in the religious sphere. Capital punishment, including execution, was reserved for the most severe crimes such as killing somebody. The methods of execution would include hanging, drowning, or other forms of judicial killings. Against most of these really depend on the severity of these crimes. And finally, of course, number 1, which is the death penalty. I mean, obviously, if you kill someone, you're met in the court of law based on which country you're in, and if you're in Canada, if you commit manslaughter, you might have to face, in the level of seriousness, up to 10 years. In the US, it's up to 25, but of course, in the prison systems, vary and depends on what the clause was, as well as on good behavior and then parole. But in ancient Egypt, they appreciated the sanctity of life and respected it, which made them use the death penalty in order to not violate the sanctity, so the divide between killing and manslaughter, as an example, had to be made in order to preserve the non-violation of the death penalty. The death penalty was more for intentional killings and even resulted to psychological sanctions that were viewed more severe than execution. For example, if a parent killed their young, the body of the killer was then tied to the corpse of the victim for 3 days until the moment of decomposition, all while under the protection of guards and burning alive for young killings of their parents. It was also more of a warning to anyone who threatened to kill anyone, and even given the option that if you committed death on yourself and take your own life was apparently a gift granted to those who are sentenced to death.